Kalen sat at the center of the Zenthara station, surrounded by the quiet hum of alien technology. The station orbited Earth, a marvel of galactic engineering, its sleek, metallic exterior cutting through the darkness of space like a blade. Inside, the place was alive with activity, alien researchers from countless species working tirelessly to uncover the mysteries of humanity. They came to study the enigma of Earth, a world unlike any other, a cradle of both staggering brilliance and horrifying violence. This place was a neutral ground, a beacon of knowledge and curiosity. Yet, as Kalen observed the bustling corridors, his heart grew heavy. The sense of isolation was palpable. He, along with his fellow researchers, was surrounded by the vastness of space, disconnected from home worlds they could never return to. The station was a sanctuary for knowledge, but for Kalen, it had become a prison. His obsession with understanding humanity, its complexities, its contradictions, had consumed him. The more he learned, the less he understood. The complexities of the human psyche were like a black hole, drawing him in, pulling him further from his sanity. He had spent over a century studying humans, and now, standing at the precipice of his own unraveling, he wondered if it had been a mistake. Kalen had always prided himself on his intellect. As a Cerethian, a species known for their peaceful nature and technological superiority, he had been chosen to study humanity. His work on human behavior, culture, and psychology made him the foremost expert in his field. He was a scholar, revered for his meticulous research. Yet as the years passed, Kalen found himself trapped in a cycle of obsession. Humans were paradoxes, simultaneously noble and flawed, creative yet destructive, capable of both unimaginable beauty and unfathomable cruelty. At first, Kalen believed he could understand them, but now every new discovery about humanity only deepened the chasm between his understanding and the reality he was studying. His sense of identity began to erode, like sand slipping through. His fingers, what had begun as a quest for knowledge, had turned into a descent into existential dread. Kalen's own mind was starting to fragment. His once clear understanding of Earth had been shattered by the complexities he had uncovered. The contradictions within humanity, its triumphs and failures, its capacity for both good and evil, no longer made sense to him. The scholar, who had once been so certain, now questioned everything, including his own purpose. The deeper Kalen delved into his research, the more his health deteriorated. His obsession with humanity's paradoxes consumed him. The self-destructive tendencies of humans, their wars, their violence, their moral failings, overwhelmed him. He had never anticipated how deeply their flaws would resonate within him. Each new revelation destabilized his sense of self. He began to hear voices, whispers from long-dead humans, their thoughts and emotions bleeding into his consciousness. Kalen felt as though he were no longer observing humanity from a distance. Instead, he was becoming a part of its tumultuous history. He saw visions, vivid hallucinations of himself, living in different time periods, each one more disturbing than the last. In one, he was a soldier in a world war, caught in the chaos and violence. In another, he was a poet during a time of fleeting peace, grappling with the meaning of existence. He saw himself as a scientist on the brink of a great discovery, only to witness it twisted and corrupted by human frailty. And in yet another, he was a revolutionary, fighting against an oppressive regime, desperate for change, but aware that the cycle of violence would never end. These visions were not just fleeting dreams, they were his reality. They bled into his waking moments, leaving Kalen unsure of where his identity began and where humanity's ended. The line between observer and participant had blurred, and in this confusion, Kalen began to lose his mind. One evening, while sifting through the endless data on humanity's history, Kalen came across an ancient human artifact, a book titled The Paradox of Self. It was a text written by a philosopher long forgotten by Earth's history. The book explored human consciousness and identity, suggesting that identity was not fixed, but constantly evolving, shaped by experiences, contradictions, and choices. Kalen read the book with an intensity he had not felt in years. Its contents struck him like a thunderclap. The text questioned the very nature of being, asking how humans could be both self-aware and unaware of their true nature at the same time. It was an intellectual challenge that Kalen could not ignore. But as he read, the words seemed to blur before his eyes, as though the book itself was shifting, reshaping his understanding of reality. The deeper he went, the more he felt a connection to humanity, a deep, unsettling bond. The more he understood the human condition, the more he began to see himself as just another paradox. Was he too lost within his own identity? The realization sent shockwaves through his mind. The truth he had spent a century uncovering now seemed impossible to grasp. The more Kalen read, the more he felt that understanding humanity was no longer within his reach. The contradictions that once fascinated him now overwhelmed him. The boundaries of his own identity were dissolving. He was losing himself in his obsession, trapped in a world of paradoxes with no way out. This realization sent Kalen spiraling into confusion and self-doubt. His breakdown was inevitable. Kalen's mind began to fracture. His connection to humanity, once a source of intellectual fascination, had now become his prison. He questioned his purpose as a scholar, wondering if he had ever truly understood the species he had dedicated his life to studying. The voices grew louder, their words more insistent. His once clear sense of self had shattered, replaced by a cacophony of human thoughts and emotions, each one conflicting with the other. He felt as though he were being torn apart, unable to reconcile the paradoxes that had consumed his research. Humanity's flaws, their capacity for both destruction and creation, seemed insurmountable. And yet, in the depths of his breakdown, Kalen realized something profound. In the very contradictions that had driven him to madness, he found a strange sense of peace. Humanity's strength, he now understood, lay in its ability to adapt, to evolve, and to find meaning in the chaos. It was this resilience, this willingness to persevere in the face of overwhelming odds, that made humans unique. Kalen saw that humanity, despite its flaws, had an incredible capacity for endurance. He realized that the key to understanding humanity was not in solving its paradoxes, but in accepting them. The mystery of humanity was not a puzzle to be solved, but a journey to be embraced. This newfound understanding brought Kalen a moment of clarity, a brief respite from the madness that had consumed him. He knew that his obsession had driven him to the brink of insanity, but now he saw the value in letting go of the need for complete understanding. He could no longer control the paradox of humanity, but he could accept it. Kalen chose to embrace the unknown. He would no longer try to force humanity into a neat, understandable box. Instead, he would learn to appreciate its contradictions, its complexities, and its capacity for both greatness and failure. In that moment of acceptance, Kalen found peace. The answers he had sought so desperately were not to be found in the human condition, but in the act of embracing the mystery itself. Kalen's journey had been one of madness and discovery, but in the end, it was a journey of self-realization. As he sat in the quiet of his lab, gazing out at the stars, he understood that humanity, despite all its contradictions, would continue to surprise the universe. The mysteries of humanity were vast, and while they might never be fully understood, Kalen had learned to appreciate their beauty. His work on Zenthara had helped humanity's alien neighbors understand their own place in the universe, but it had also helped Kalen understand himself. He had come to terms with the idea that sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from answers, but from the acceptance of the questions. Kalen sat at the center of his dimly lit lab, his eyes heavy with the weight of years spent studying humanity. The sleek metallic walls of the Zenthara station, orbiting Earth in 2154, loomed around him like a cage. The space station was a marvel of advanced technology, home to a multitude of alien species who had come to study humanity from every possible angle. It was a neutral ground where scientists from across the galaxy convened, each fascinated by the enigma that Earth represented. Yet, for Kalen, the station had become something else, a place of isolation. The bustling activity of his colleagues seemed distant, meaningless. As a Cerethian scholar, Kalen had once prided himself on his ability to understand humanity. He had spent over a century studying Earth's history, culture, and behavior, becoming the foremost expert in his field. But now, the contradictions of humanity gnawed at him. The paradoxes were too vast, too complicated, and they were slowly eating away at his mind. Kalen had become obsessed with these contradictions, humanity's capacity for both destruction and creation, its beauty and its cruelty. He had set out to understand it all, but now, as he immersed himself deeper into the study, the lines between himself and humanity began to blur. His identity fractured as he became trapped in a cycle of confusion and self-doubt. One night, as Kalen slept, his mind spiraled into madness. His once controlled thoughts fragmented into a series of vivid dreams. In these visions, he was no longer a passive observer of history. Instead, he lived as a soldier in a war-torn world, feeling the weight of death and destruction with every step. He was a poet in a time of fleeting peace, grappling with the meaning of existence and the fleeting nature of beauty. In another, he was a scientist standing on the brink of a great discovery, only to watch it slip away as humanity's flaws ruined everything. He saw himself as a revolutionary, fighting for a cause he believed in, only to witness the cycle of violence repeat itself. Each of these personas represented a different aspect of humanity, its potential for greatness and its propensity for self-destruction. Kalen's identity began to dissolve as he lived these lives. He could no longer separate his own mind from the people he studied. The boundaries between his thoughts and theirs disappeared, leaving him consumed by the realization that humanity's paradoxes were too vast to comprehend. He was no longer just studying humanity. He had become a part of it. His own identity was lost within the chaos of history. The dreams tormented him, each one exposing a new layer of human contradiction. The weight of these visions pressed down on him, driving him deeper into madness. Kalen's descent into chaos was mirrored in his work. His once pristine lab was now a cluttered, chaotic mess. Pages of research notes were scattered across the floor. Data terminals blinked uselessly, and the walls were covered with incomplete thoughts and fractured ideas. His meticulous approach to research had given way to a frantic obsession. The contradictions of humanity overwhelmed him, and he could no longer maintain the logical structure that had once defined his work. His immersion in human history and philosophy only deepened the confusion. Every new discovery seemed to contradict the last, and Kalen began to question everything he had once believed. Humanity's brilliance and its flaws were inseparable, and he could not understand how a species capable of such greatness could also be responsible for so much suffering. The more he studied, the less he understood. His work had transformed from a noble pursuit of knowledge to an all-consuming obsession that blurred the lines between discovery and madness. Kalen's mind was no longer a place of clarity and order. It had become a battleground, and he was losing. His colleagues on Zenthara began to notice the changes. the once respected scholar, whose work had shaped much of the station's understanding of humanity, was now a shell of himself. Kalen's erratic behavior and increasingly paranoid ramblings left his fellow researchers concerned. His lab, once a sanctuary of intellectual achievement, was now a chaotic mess, a physical manifestation of his unraveling mind. The other scientists, both alien and human, were baffled by Kalen's refusal to accept help. They sent a team of medical specialists to intervene, hoping to stabilize him before his mental state deteriorated further. But Kalen refused. He was convinced that no one could possibly understand the human condition as he did. He believed his work had transcended the need for external help. The voices in his head grew louder, the hallucinations more vivid. He shut himself off from everyone, pushing away the very species he had spent so many years studying. His alien colleagues, who had once admired him, now feared him. They did not understand what had happened to Kalen. The once immaculate scholar had become a prisoner of his own mind. The tension on the station grew as his behavior became more unpredictable. Kalen's detachment from reality was complete, and his work had become a spiral of obsession that seemed to have no end. The more Kalen delved into humanity's history, the more the contradictions weighed on his mind. He became obsessed with the endless cycle of violent self-destruction and fleeting moments of redemption that seemed to define humanity's story. Every time he looked deeper, he saw humanity's ability to rise to great heights only to fall into chaos again. This endless cycle, progress followed by regression, became an obsession. Kalen's once optimistic view of humanity had become tainted by the darkness he now saw in their nature. He started to believe that humanity would never evolve beyond its flaws, that it was doomed to repeat its mistakes forever. His mind became consumed by this belief. His research, once a way to uncover the truths of humanity, now seemed like an exercise in futility. Kalen began to question the very purpose of his work. What was the point of studying humanity if it was doomed to fail? What was the point of understanding if there was no hope for progress? These questions consumed him, and his grip on reality loosened further. His sense of self fractured as he saw his own identity reflected in humanity's endless contradictions. He wondered if he, too, was just another part of the cycle, trapped in an endless loop of obsession and despair. Kalen's isolation deepened as his paranoia grew. He began to believe that humanity was aware of him, that humans across time were communicating with him through some cosmic link. He believed that their voices were trying to influence him, to stop him from continuing his research. The voices in his head became more insistent, one in particular, a voice from the distant future, warning him that if he continued his work, he would unravel the very fabric of human existence. Kalen's fear escalated. Was humanity trying to stop him? Were the contradictions in his research a warning? This growing paranoia pushed Kalen to the edge. He became desperate to halt his studies, but at the same time, he felt an insatiable need to continue. The voices pulled him in two directions, and he didn't know which way to turn. The more he struggled, the more he lost his grip on reality, and the more the question of humanity's true nature consumed him. Kalen stood in the center of his once pristine lab, now a chaotic mess of disorganized papers, discarded data terminals, and scribbled notes on every surface. His hands shook as he tried to focus on the display in front of him, but the figures blurred, the words on the screen twisted into incomprehensible symbols. His research had consumed him for decades, but now it was nothing more than a chaotic web of contradictions. His obsession with humanity's paradoxes had spiraled out of control, his once calculated intellect now twisted by frustration and fear. The humans he had studied with such care, their contradictions, their beauty and their flaws, had become a mirror of his fractured psyche. Kalen's temper flared. He lashed out at the data terminal, slamming his fist against the screen. The terminal sputtered and died. "Enough," Kalen whispered to himself, his voice breaking. "This has to stop. I have to understand." But the more he tried to control his thoughts, the more they spiraled beyond his grasp. The flashes of history, the wars, the revolutions, the moments of brilliance and decay flooded his mind, each one more vivid and disturbing than the last. He was no longer just studying these events. He was living them, becoming them. Kalen felt himself slipping away, his mind consumed by the very thing he had sought to understand. His colleagues, who had once admired him for his insight, now looked at him with fear. They saw the change, the way his eyes darted nervously, the way his hands trembled as he scribbled incoherent thoughts. He wasn't the same Kalen anymore. His alien peers watched him with growing concern, unsure of how to help. They had once marveled at his intellect, his ability to unravel the mysteries of human behavior, but now they feared him. His mind was unraveling, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. A group of medical specialists sent to intervene found Kalen in a frenzy, shouting at the AI systems that had once been his trusted tools. "You don't understand," he screamed at the machines. "You don't know what they are. You don't know the contradictions. They're driving me mad." The AI systems, programmed to assist, remained silent, their holographic interfaces flickering in response to Kalen's outbursts. He smashed another terminal, the sharp sound of cracking. Glass echoing through the lab. His colleagues recoiled, but none dared approach him. He was no longer the scholar they had once admired. He had become a prisoner of his own mind, trapped in a labyrinth of his own making. His obsession had destroyed him, and now it threatened to destroy everything around him. As his sanity began to slip away, Kalen's dreams became more vivid, more real. He was no longer just a scholar observing humanity from afar. He was living as them, becoming them. In one dream, he was a soldier, charging into battle, feeling the weight of death and destruction with every step. In another, he was a poet, alone in a room, trying to capture the fleeting beauty of a world on the brink of collapse. He was a scientist, making a great discovery, only to watch it unravel because of human greed. He was a revolutionary, fighting against a corrupt regime, only to see the cycle of violence repeat itself. Each life he lived in his dreams felt more real than the last. The boundaries between his own identity and those of the humans he studied blurred until he could no longer tell where one began and the other ended. "Who am I?" Kalen whispered, his voice hoarse. "Am I human too?" The hallucinations only intensified. The lines between his waking moments and his dreams became indistinguishable. He saw humans, real humans, or were they, emerging from the shadows of history, speaking to him from the past, present and future. These were not ordinary hallucinations. They were real, or at least they felt real. Kalen heard the voices of philosophers long dead, political leaders warning of the dangers of unchecked power, scientists urging him to continue his work, and even humans from the distant future speaking in cryptic messages about his role in the future of humanity. Each voice spoke with authority, yet they all contradicted one another. Some told him to continue his research, while others warned him to stop. One voice, soft and insistent, spoke of the dangers of his work, urging him to abandon his study of humanity before it was too late. "Stop, Kalen," the voice echoed in his mind. "You're unraveling the fabric of human existence." But Kalen couldn't stop. He couldn't let go. His obsession had consumed him completely. He had to understand. The paradoxes of humanity, its brilliance and its flaws, had become his obsession, and now they had become his prison. He could no longer separate the voices from his own thoughts. They blended together until Kalen was lost in a world of confusion and uncertainty. The more he listened, the more distorted his perception of reality became. He saw reenactments of human history, but they were not like any history Kalen had read. They were twisted, distorted, and chaotic, moments of triumph and tragedy playing out in a never-ending loop, as if humanity were trapped in an eternal cycle of self-destruction. Kalen could no longer discern what was real and what was imagined. The voices, the hallucinations, the memories, they all blurred together into a swirling vortex of confusion. His mind was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His obsession with understanding humanity had led him to this point. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. His once clear understanding of Earth's history was gone, replaced by a chaotic, fractured view of a species incapable of evolving beyond its own contradictions. His paranoia grew as the voices became more insistent. He began to believe that humanity was watching him, that they were aware of his every move, every thought. He couldn't escape the feeling that they were manipulating him, controlling him from across time. The idea consumed him. Was humanity across time trying to stop him? Was he being manipulated by forces beyond his understanding? The voices from the future grew louder, more insistent. "You must stop," one voice warned. "If you continue, you will tear apart the very fabric of human existence." Kalen's desperation reached its peak. The need to continue his work, his obsession, fought against his growing fear. He couldn't stop. But was it even worth continuing? Was he on the verge of destroying humanity itself by simply studying it? His belief that his research was not only futile but dangerous consumed him. Yet even as he contemplated abandoning everything, he felt an overwhelming compulsion to dive even deeper, to unravel the last remaining mystery. His mind was a battlefield, torn between the urge to stop and the desire to understand the impossible. As the chaos of his mind reached its peak, Kalen found himself facing a critical choice. Was he destined to unravel the truth of humanity, even if it meant losing himself in the process? Or should he abandon his research, relinquishing his need for understanding in order to preserve his sanity and the fragile reality he still clung to? His journey into the paradoxes of humanity had led him here, into a maelstrom of confusion and self-doubt. The voices, the hallucinations, the contradictions, they were all part of his struggle, and Kalen knew that the final answer lay, not in understanding, but in accepting the unknown. Would he continue to search for answers, no matter the cost, or would he finally let go of the need to control what could never be understood? The decision would shape his future, and the future of humanity itself. Kalen's mind was a battlefield. The once clear structure of his thoughts was now a tangled mess of conflicting memories, identities, and emotions. He could no longer tell where his mind ended and the lives of the humans he studied began. In his fractured state, Kalen was living their history, not merely observing it. One moment, he was a soldier, running through the smoke of a world war, the sounds of explosions deafening in his ears, the weight of a rifle in his hands. The next, he was a poet, alone in a room, ink-stained fingers trying to capture the fleeting beauty of a world that could not last. He felt the heat of revolution burning in his veins, the desperation of a scientist who had just uncovered the key to a groundbreaking discovery. Each life he became was filled with intensity, full of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. Kalen stumbled, his mind reeling. He could no longer distinguish the thoughts of the soldier, the poet, the scientist, and the revolutionary from his own. Each persona bled into the next, a chaotic blur of conflicting passions, fears, and desires. The pain of human existence, its beauty and its brutality, consumed him. Every face, every story, every choice felt like his own. He felt the rage of the soldier as the battlefield stretched before him, the sorrow of the poet as he watched beauty slip through his fingers, and the guilt of the scientist who, in his quest for knowledge had unknowingly caused suffering. It was overwhelming. Kalen collapsed to the floor, clutching his head as the flood of memories continued to crash over him. "You are all me," Kalen muttered to himself. "I am nothing but their contradictions." His mind shattered further as the hallucinations grew more intense. The lines between reality and illusion blurred, and Kalen was left grasping at the fragments of his own identity, each piece slipping further away. The walls of his lab, once a sanctuary for his research, felt distant and foreign. He could no longer separate himself from the human history he had studied so deeply. Humanity's contradictions had consumed him, its wars, its peace, its brilliance, and its flaws. Kalen's sanity hung by a thread, his existence a reflection of the very paradoxes he had spent a lifetime attempting to understand. And then, a moment of clarity struck him like lightning. The voices of the past, the present, and the future echoed in his mind. He saw the truth in humanity's contradictions. It wasn't that humans were irreparably flawed. It was that their strength lay precisely in their paradoxes. They were both capable of unspeakable destruction and unimaginable creativity. They were selfish, yet capable of boundless compassion. They were a species constantly teetering on the edge of their own undoing, but always finding a way to rise again. Kalen's mind quieted, the voices fading into a hum. His heart pounded as the weight of this realization sank in. Humanity's greatest strength lay in the fact that they could never be fully understood. Their contradictions made them unique in the universe. Kalen's obsession, his need to fully comprehend humanity, had been a futile attempt to control the uncontrollable. For the first time, Kalen saw the beauty in the mystery. He could not understand everything about humanity, and that was okay. His desire to dissect and explain every aspect of their existence had blinded him to the simple truth that some things, especially human nature, were meant to remain unsolved. He had been so consumed by the search for answers that he had forgotten the value of the questions themselves. Kalen took a deep breath, the weight in his chest lifting as he embraced the paradox he had spent a century trying to solve. Humanity's contradictions were not flaws. They were the essence of what made them resilient, adaptable, and endlessly fascinating. But the cost had been high. Kalen's obsession had nearly destroyed him. He had come so close to losing himself entirely in the pursuit of answers, and now he was left with a choice. Should he continue his research, risking his sanity and well-being, or should he let go of his obsession and accept the mystery of humanity? The tension within him grew as he stared at the holographic data terminals, the piles of incomplete research, and the myriad of unanswered questions that haunted his mind. The pull to continue, to dive deeper into the unknown, was powerful. But Kalen knew that the price was too high. The knowledge he sought could never be fully grasped, and the effort to attain it was eroding the very essence of who he was. He closed his eyes, took a slow, steadying breath, and made his choice. "Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved," Kalen whispered to himself, "and that is okay." In that moment, Kalen felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The chaos in his mind began to quiet, the hallucinations fading into nothingness. His grip on reality strengthened, and for the first time in a long while, he saw himself clearly, not as a scholar consumed by obsession, but as a learner, a humble traveler in the vast, unknowable universe. Kalen understood now that the search for knowledge was not about finding all the answers, but about embracing the journey of discovery, of learning to live with the questions. He had finally accepted that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its perfection, but in its imperfections. And in that realization, Kalen found peace. The pressure that had weighed on him for so long lifted, leaving room for a new sense of purpose. Kalen was no longer the man who had sought to unravel every mystery of humanity. He was now the man who had learned to embrace the unknown. The scholar had become a student once again, not of answers, but of questions. And in that new role, he found freedom. The journey of discovery was far from over, but for Kalen, it was no longer about the destination. It was about the wisdom found in the pursuit itself. Read in frantic scribblings and fragmented thoughts were now eerily calm, with only a few scattered papers left behind. His mind, no longer consumed by obsession, felt strangely clear. He was no longer the man he had been, the man driven by an insatiable need to understand humanity's paradoxes, to dissect its complexities and contradictions. The voices, the hallucinations, the constant spiraling descent into madness, all of it had faded. In its place was something new, a quiet acceptance. Kalen had once believed that solving humanity's mysteries would give him control, that if he could only comprehend their contradictions, he could grasp the universe itself. But now, with his mind unclouded, he understood that the search for answers was never about control. It was about embracing the unknown. Humanity's strength was not in its perfection, but in its imperfections, the ability to adapt, to learn, from mistakes to evolve in the face of adversity. That was what made humans unique. Kalen now saw his own research not as a journey toward mastery, but as a process of discovery, where the questions were just as important as the answers. He stood up from his desk, looking out of the observation window at the stars, the quiet vastness of space stretching out before him. He had spent over a century studying humanity, but in the end, it wasn't the answers that had changed him. It was the realization that some mysteries, some parts of existence, were meant to remain beyond comprehension, and that was okay. He had learned to accept it. The atmosphere on Zenthara was different now. The team, once divided, now worked together with renewed respect for the complexities of humanity. Kalen's transformation had set the tone for a new era of cooperation between humans and aliens. The study of humanity's contradictions was no longer a mere academic exercise. It had become a symbol of the shared willingness to embrace the unknown. The barriers that had once kept the species apart now served as opportunities for growth, collaboration, and mutual understanding. Kalen watched as his colleagues, humans and aliens alike, gathered around a table discussing their next project. They no longer saw each other as competitors or threats. There was no more fear or mistrust, only a shared curiosity about the universe and a desire to explore it together. The lessons learned from humanity's paradoxes had brought them closer, not just as colleagues, but as allies. The research that Kalen had once undertaken alone now had the potential to change the galaxy. What had once been a solitary quest for knowledge was now a shared journey, where the strengths and weaknesses of each species could complement one another. He had once believed that humanity was an enigma too vast to understand. But now he saw them as they truly were, flawed, yes, but brilliant in their resilience. They were a species capable of both destruction and creation, capable of falling and rising again. Kalen's journey, filled with madness and self-discovery, had shown him that humanity's greatest strength was not in its perfection, but in its ability to endure. It was a lesson he had learned the hard way, but one that would shape the future of both species. As Kalen looked at the stars, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges that neither he nor his allies could predict. But now, instead of viewing those challenges as insurmountable obstacles, he saw them as opportunities for growth. Humanity and aliens alike would face them together, not as conquerors, but as equals, ready to explore the cosmos, ready to embrace the unknown. Galen had once feared that he would never understand humanity, but now he knew that the journey of discovery was never meant to end. It was a journey without final answers, only more questions, and that, Galen realized, was the beauty of it all. The universe was vast, and the possibilities were limitless. With newfound peace, Galen turned away from the window, ready to continue his work, but now with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a scholar and what it meant to be human. Galen sat in the silence of his lab, the hum of the station's systems a faint background to his thoughts. The chaos that had once consumed him, the frantic scribblings on walls, the erratic bursts of anger, had faded into the stillness. Zenthara, the vast observatory that once buzzed with the intensity of his obsession, now felt peaceful. The walls that had once held the weight of his unraveling mind now stood in calm repose, as though the very structure of the station had taken a deep, collective breath. His mind, too, had quieted. The voices that once whispered from every corner of his thoughts had stopped. No more philosophers or warriors, no more future humans calling to him, just the quiet, vast emptiness of space. The endless stars outside the station's window seemed to reflect his own stillness, as though the universe itself had drawn a slow, deep breath. For so long, Galen had been consumed with understanding the paradoxes of humanity, its contradictions, that drove him to madness. He had looked for patterns in their violence, their creation, their capacity for both brilliance and destruction. And now, after all that he had suffered, he finally understood. Humanity was not meant to be understood in the simple terms he had once sought. It was not a puzzle to be solved, but a paradox to be embraced. Humanity was like the stars, an ever-evolving, ever-changing force capable of both great light and great darkness. That was the beauty of it. The strength of humanity lay not in its perfection, but in its imperfection, in its ability to adapt, to evolve, to rise and fall and rise again. And in that, Galen found peace. He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the endless expanse of the cosmos. The galaxy stretched before him, vast, beautiful, and full of possibilities. He no longer felt the overwhelming urge to dissect every part of humanity's existence. His journey was no longer about the need to control, to know everything. It was about discovery. But the discovery was not the destination. It was the journey itself. Humanity's greatest strength was that it could keep moving forward, even when the answers weren't clear, even when the path seemed uncertain. And Galen understood that now. Humanity's future and his own were not bound by the need to fully understand the mysteries of existence, but by the willingness to embrace them. The message Galen had uncovered, his understanding of humanity's paradox, began to spread throughout the galaxy. What was once confined to the sterile walls of Zenthara became a beacon of insight, a cornerstone for a new era of exploration. Alien civilizations, once eager to dissect humanity for their own purposes, began to see the species differently. No longer were they simply an object of study, an anomaly to be understood. Humanity was now viewed with respect. The paradox that defined them, their ability to both destroy and create, became a model for how the galaxy should move forward. The pursuit of knowledge was no longer about conquest. It was about understanding, about collaboration, about exploring not just the physical universe, but the depth of consciousness itself. Galen's legacy opened the door to a broader, more inclusive form of discovery. A discovery that was not about finding answers, but about embracing the questions that would drive the universe forward. Humanity, once seen as an outlier, now stood at the forefront of a new age. A new chapter had begun, one where humanity and its alien allies stood united, not as separate entities, but as partners in a greater journey. The lessons Galen had learned, The acceptance of humanity's flaws, its strengths, its paradoxes, had paved the way for this moment. There was no fear, no division, only curiosity, only respect. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but with the wisdom Kalen had imparted, both humans and aliens were ready to face it. Together, they would explore the cosmos, not as conquerors, but as equals. The road ahead, filled with uncertainty and unknown challenges, was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. The journey of discovery, Kalen realized, would never end.